Yet another edition of the Bob McCowan podcast. I am the aforementioned, and that is John Shannon over there, curiously looking at me with a.
Well, I waiting for my name to show up in the podcast.
We'll keep waiting. It's not happening anytime soon that I'm aware of. When you get your podcast and I co-host with you, then it'll be the John Shannon podcast.
No, and then you'll whine.
I think that's a better idea. Then go ahead.
Then you'll whine and say, why am I not in the title?
No, I'll quit. That's all I'll do. I won't whine and complain. We want to get to our guest. Gabe Polsky is with us. He has a new film out. It's called Red Penguins. It debuts on the 4th of August. It's from Universal. It'll be available on all digital and cable systems in the United States and on demand here in Canada. Thank you very much for your time today. And I know a little bit of your background. So you're a Chicago boy, is that right, originally?
Yeah, that's right.
And grew up a hockey fan, I assume, with the Blackhawks?
Yeah, I grew up with the old stadium in Chicago. I would go, my dad had season tickets, so we would go, and I played hockey growing up, and I played in college at Yale.
And you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you, at least part of what I know is that you were very much impressed, attracted to the Soviet NHL series back in the 80s. And I don't know, was it a Canada Cup, John, or was it I don't remember what it was exactly.
87 was probably the highlight of the decade, right, Steve?
Yeah.
Right, Gabe?
Yeah, I would watch religiously. So like my study would be basically putting on those games on VHS tape, and I would just watch them over and over. And I would draw the plays and try and, understand kind of how the Soviets, the combinations that they created and what they were doing out there. It was kind of like a religious experience watching that series over and over,
Now, I gather that was your first real exposure to the Russian quote-unquote national team or the Red Army team.
Yeah, I mean, I'd heard about it. I watched a little bit of the Summit series. They had also VHS tapes, and I would see little bits, but it wasn't, the skates were different back then. They were kind of flimsier. I don't know. 87, I felt like, for some reason, I thought it was on another level. The speed and with Krutov, Larionov, Makarov, and that five-man unit was just unreal. And the Kamensky line and everything. So, I mean, that was sort of the genesis of my interest. And, because I felt like, playing in the North American style of hockey, I was more of an offensive player, and I like to be creative too. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, how can I tell this to my line mates and kind of, show them how to be creative, and that we can, do interesting plays. We don't need to always just dump it in, and, we can go backwards and regroup and have a puck possession game. To me, I never understood why a player would throw away possession of the puck. If he's skilled enough, he should be able to keep control of it.
Oh, hold on. Is this Gabe Polsky or Kyle Dubas? Because those are the exact words that the Maple Leafs general manager says every day. Doesn't understand where chip and chase came from, wants puck control, wants his team to regroup. The interesting thing, Gabe, is that in 1972, Canada won that series. 1987, Canada won that series. Mm-hmm. Yet the game has morphed more to a Russian style of hockey than it has stayed a North American style of hockey.
You mean right now?
Yeah. I think we're watching a much more of what you talked about, of what you loved in 87. We're watching that in the National Hockey League now.
I think so. I think a little bit more, but I still, you don't see them regrouping a whole lot and going backwards, and I mean, it's hard for me to describe the differences between, let's say, the 87 and some of the great. But here's the difference. The difference is that the players, they're not playing with each other all day long and know each other's mind and know they don't have that kind of understanding of each other as a collective. And so it's not quite as there's not quite as much collective creativity, in my opinion, when I turn on a game. You know what I'm saying? There's so much, because the Soviets, they like never lost the puck, and the passes were always sort of like fairly accurate. Here you watch a game and like I would say most of the passes, like they don't quite connect. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of like slapping and hitting and this, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'll take a kind of a different point of view, and I may be
Yeah.
wrong on this because this is all a matter of personal opinion, but
Yeah.
I would think that the North American game has moved significantly toward what what we saw here in Canada, certainly in 72 and then in 87 and then repeatedly afterwards, moved more to some extent towards the Russian game. And at the same time, the Russian game has moved more towards the North American style.
Yeah.
And so now when we see Canada or the US against a Russian team, you see two teams that more or less play the same way. Russians never used to dump the puck in. Now they do.
Yeah. I totally agree. I even think that a lot of Canadian and American teams play more Russian than the Russians do.
I'll buy that. Yeah.
I completely agree with that.
But that speaks to a few things. First of all, I think that there are bigger thinkers in North America now than there were 30 years ago. And it also speaks to the breakdown of the system in the former Soviet Union and in Russia. And that's a big part of what your movie's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when the country collapsed in the early 90s, you know, everything went out the window. The you know, not just, you know, economically, socially, there was no laws. They were finding their identity. It was no longer communism. They didn't know what they were, and that also permeated with the hockey. Because back in the day, the Soviet teams, they would train these kids in the Tarasov style of play, and every coach in Russia knew the figurehead Tarasov and how he coached, how he trained, what his philosophy was. Every single coach in Russia, in the sports school, there are specific schools to train the athletes, right? When the system fell apart, there was no central philosopher authority, or you know, it was every man for himself. It was individuals. How the hell can I get to the NHL? That's all they thought, right? And so they just developed the individual skill. It was not about the team, the philosophy, how to play well together, the combinations. That all went out the door, but they still could develop skilled players. Do you understand?
Well, they still are.
Yeah.
Well, and yet, as you point out, the difference is that now the best of their players wind up in North America making more dollars than they would playing in the KHL. Tell me about the experience of spending time there. I assume you were there for some extended period.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there before because I shot previously the film Red Army, and I went to, you know, they featured in the festivals and everything. So, but this time around, it was, you know, I showed up in Russia for this film for Red Penguins, and I honestly on a whim, because I was very reluctant to even make this film. I didn't really want to, because I knew I was going to be exploring Russia and hockey, and I felt like I was going to be pigeonholed as that guy. So I kind of kept taking each step further reluctantly. And so I was traveling near Russia, country of Georgia. I thought that would be kind of a fun place to visit. It's different than the average place. And I decided, you know, well, I'm near Moscow. Maybe I should just show up and see, you know, what kind of interviews I could get, you know? And sometimes when you do that, when you just sort of take on a whim, and you feel like anything can happen, and maybe things will happen for a good reason and whatever. So I just called up a guy I knew in Russia who kind of finds people for me. And I said, look, I'm going to show up there in a few days. I'm going to get a visa. You know, you got to help find interviews. And he's like, well, I don't know, but I think I can help. And so I basically I landed there and was in a hotel for 3 days waiting for him to get some interviews. And so eventually we got one, and then the next one, and we rented a van, and we're basically driving this van all over Moscow, getting the weirdest interviews you can imagine, from like a former KGB officer to like a guy on Interpol's 10 most wanted list to, you know, managers of this Red Army team that were like incredibly shady, to like the biggest journalists in sports journalists in Russia and that political journalist. It's every character in this film is kind of peculiar, and has their own strange humor to it. I kind of describe it, tell me if I'm wrong, but kind of like Big Lebowski, but it's real, and it's the Russian Big Lebowski, you know?
So really the story for those people who are going to download it, the story is the evolution of how the Pittsburgh Penguins and their owner, Howard Baldwin, invests in, I guess, I'm going to call it Russian hockey, invests in Russian hockey, and
in the Red Army team, the famous
in the Red Army, CKSA, and the Red Army team, and then the episodes of events that occur around games and what they play. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen an NHL game with strippers between periods. I haven't seen that on the ice in the NHL yet. It may come, but I don't think that's going to happen for a while. So that's the kind of that. It was a fascinating thing to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it was just that period of time was one of the craziest periods in history. You see a country go from complete control and authoritarianism to almost no control. It was anarchy. There was no laws, and that's the context of this experience, of this business deal where the Penguins took, half ownership of this team. I mean, the whole premise is impossible, right? You have this team that's the pride of Russia, that's owned by the military, and they're bankrupt, and they have to go to their enemies, to the NHL, who had just basically extracted all of the greatest Russian players, and have them invest and kind of save this franchise, legendary franchise. And so the film kind of takes you on this journey through this experiment, this impossible experiment. And the business deal itself is a metaphor for every business that was entering Russia in the 90s. They all came in promising, all the opportunities that we had to collaborate and do business together. And then in the end, when there was any sniff of success, that's when things got shady, and the mafia enters.
Lots of things to talk about here. Gabe Polsky is with us. The film is Red Penguins. It debuts this week across North America. I have a production company. We do documentary filmmaking, and I'm intrigued by your description of the process of going to Georgia on a vacation and then almost kind of on a whim showing up in Moscow and trying to put the pieces together on a documentary. As a general rule, you do these things with, if not a script, at least an outline of what you want to do and where you want to go, and it will change dramatically. Did you have that in your head when you landed in Moscow, or did this just all kind of materialize out of nothing?
Okay, so I originally, the first guy I interviewed was Steve Warshaw, who is the main character in the film. Steve is the guy on the ground in Russia that the Penguins send over. He's this very eccentric kind of Woody Allen guy that is a marketing guy that goes and tries to bring this American business mentality to the Russians. And he creates all these insane marketing ideas, like Bara's drinking beer on the ice and the strippers and all that. So anyway, so I interview Steve, and Steve kind of gives me the story. He's the only interview I have. And so at that point, I kind of understood the story. So when I decided to go to Russia, it was to try and fill in all the other points of view. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
So I did have a sense of the story, right? But I didn't like script it out. I didn't know who I was going to get. I didn't know what supporting characters I was going to get, Did
you have trouble getting support video? I mean, invariably, especially in a sports story, you gotta have lots of video that has been shot and stored and this and that. And, we think of Russia as being a tough place to get cooperation from. Did you have problems with that?
Well, there's two things. One is Steve Warshaw's kind of was hoarding all of this archival material in his house. He's been saving basically everything about this team in his attic for years, right? So
Really?
he even tickets to games. I mean, every little thing that was produced, contracts, everything. And so that was helpful. Then also I have a guy in Russia who's pretty good at kind of tracking stuff down. The crazy thing is a lot of the stuff came up when I was already done with the movie. All this new footage came in and I was kind of depressed, but anyways.
Well, the footage you have, Gabe, the footage you have in the documentary is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It is something to behold, and you know, this is, for me, this is about the fourth or fifth documentary in the last 4 or 5 years on Soviet and Russian hockey. But I would tell you right now, I think your footage is better than anybody else's.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, the whole, as you know, Bob, the whole thing is you got to get the audience into this world and understanding, and make sure the footage is, you know, dynamic enough. It's new enough. You haven't seen it over and over. It's not the sort of classic things that they show, you know, and to get them into the world, into a world they've never seen, they don't really understand. And that's exciting. You know, that gives the film much more energy than just talking heads and, you know, pictures or whatever.
We know that the communist system is gone essentially from Russia, but I'm wondering, did you have any difficulty with government agencies accessing things, freedom that is taken for granted here in North America? Any of those issues?
Well, I had well, let me give you an example. So there was a guy in the film that's on Interpol's 10 Most Wanted with like along with Osama bin Laden, like other guys, right? And we had no problem getting to him, and he invited us to his restaurant for lunch. He was the only guy in there. It was this huge restaurant, and he fed us and was basically like really open. And so I was like, okay, wow, okay, I guess it's not that hard. Now there are other people in the film that were a little more paranoid and not really open with information, like Valery Gushin, who's the manager of the team at the time, was sort of, I had to work with him in kind of a, I don't know what the right word is, but in a different way. I had to make him feel comfortable with me, you know, make him feel like I'm kind of an idiot, which maybe I am, by the way. But I got some nice information from him non-verbally, I think, right? And then what else? I mean, yeah, I'm not sure what else.
Did you ever feel?
Yeah. There was one time, sorry to interrupt you. There was one time where I was interviewing this KGB guy, and right near Red Square, and he started talking about a lot, you know, getting really like open about stuff. And then basically a guy appeared behind us, a little overweight. He just was standing right behind us for 5 minutes, just like I had to stop the interview and say, well, what the hell, you know, who is this guy? What? And right after I did that, the police show up and say that there's a bomb in the area, you got to leave. So that was a little strange.
So what kind of effect do you think the Penguins, the Red Penguins, had on professional hockey in Russia? And are we seeing any of that with the KHL?
Well, it was the first time that they really started to see American like business mentality, how to bring fans to games, especially if the hockey's not very good, which it wasn't, you know, which that was the kind of embarrassment and irony, is that no one was going to the games because of the hockey. It was all because of the crazy shows they were doing and marketing. They would get free toilet paper and razors and, you know, all these odd things. So they witnessed that for the first time in sponsorships, and that was, you know, clearly they learned from that, and it's become a little bit more westernized the way they approach it there. I mean, it's still not that they don't generate, you know, as much money as the NHL. So, but they took a lot from that, and eventually, when they started having success with this team and the attendance, that's when they said, you know, look, I think we could do this ourselves. We don't need the Americans.
How do you think, or do you know? I don't know how many people you've back in Russia have seen this film now. I assume some of your closer associates have. How do they view it?
Yeah, so we had a screening in New York, and we invited a lot of like Russian players, like Alexei Yashin and his wife and family, and a lot of like Fetisov's daughter and a bunch of other daughters of famous players. And afterwards, we had a little get together afterwards, and they just really enjoy it. I mean, for them, the experience is a little bit more emotional. Because they felt it, they suffered through that period. It was a really dark time, and like people were really struggling. Anyone who had relatives there or lived there, it was just devastating. So it's a bittersweet experience. They can laugh and kind of understand it, but they're way more serious about it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Americans can watch it and say, "Oh, look at that, that's so funny," and that's a crazy experience, and laugh, but it's just not as like, doesn't hit your heart as much.
Well, and this was at a time where, I mean, you document it well in the movie about the state of the arena and the washrooms and everything, how everything was falling apart, and it was more than the hockey world, it was society.
Exactly. Yeah, there were like electricians sleeping in the boxes, the sky boxes there. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty serious.
When did you finish the film? How long ago?
I finished it right before Toronto Film Festival. The film was accepted there. The past one, what was it, last year?
Yep.
So, yeah.
So 19.
Yeah.
I assume you are on to other things. Just out of interest, what's next for you, or what are you working on now?
Well, I'm focused right now on putting together a feature film. It's based on a book called Flowers for Algernon, which is a very famous.
I remember it. Yeah,
Sure.
I know it.
Yeah, so I adapted that and cast Pete Davidson in the role. It's an odd choice, but I think it's really fresh and inspired. So we'll see if we can get everything together and shoot that when things clear up.
Any ideas about another sports documentary, something else you'd like to explore that maybe you haven't gotten to yet?
Yeah, there's ideas that I think about, and some that come my way. I feel like if I tell you, someone's gonna rip it off or whatever.
Okay,
But
I get it. Well, with success comes further success. So one of the things I think we've all come to understand, and obviously you're having some of that. John, you wanted to jump in with something else?
Well, no, I just gave you. I mean, you're living in Southern California. You're a hockey player. Are you part of all these Sunday nighters that play hockey? Whether it's Bruckheimer or all Cuba Gooding. I mean, what are you one of those guys out there?
Well, I played one time like a long time ago, and I was never invited back. So, no, I'm kidding. But I did. But it's this whole, I don't really like. I'm not part of like a clique, But whatever. I met Cuba Gooding. He came. He came to one of my premieres, and we hung out a little bit. Whatever. I play a little bit. The last time I played, I broke my knee in half.
Oh my God.
Nice.
Yeah.
That'll end the social aspect of playing hockey, especially when you're not getting paid for it. The movie is called Red Penguins. Gabe Polsky has been with us. It debuts August the 4th from Universal. It's available across the U.S. on digital and cable, on demand, across Canada. We wish you good luck with it. John's had a chance to watch most of it. I've seen bits and pieces here, and I'm looking forward to sitting down and having a look next week. And we'll keep our fingers crossed for you. Good luck with it.
Thanks a lot. Best of luck, guys. Thank you.
Spasiba.
Thanks very much.
Spasiba. До
Свидания.
Yes, same to you, and twice on Thursdays. We'll see you next time on the podcast. Bye-bye.